quite a while that it was either proteins or DNA. A lot of scientists that thought proteins were the genetic material, and a lot of scientists said DNA was. And as you saw through the experiment, especially with Hershey and Chase and Chargraph, really came up with the idea that it's DNA that's actually the genetic material, not proteins. They didn't know what it looked like. They didn't know the structure of it, the double helix look to it. So it wasn't really until the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, when some scientists really started working on this, Franklin and Watson and Crick. And you got to understand the dynamic here. It's kind of an interesting history and bit of information. Watson and Crick worked for Cambridge, University of Cambridge. And Franklin worked for King's College, which is part of the Oxford system. And they were both trying to figure out what the structure of DNA looked like, because they knew if they could figure that out, it was like a Nobel Prize kind of deal. And it would open doors up to many different things. Franklin was one of the few females that was actually working in the science field. In Western culture, back in the 40s and 50s, there wasn't a lot. It was just the cultural aspect of it. Females weren't in science. I mean, they weren't in the workplace very much. I mean, that just wasn't acceptable in Western society at the time. Obviously, for the betterment of society, that's improved significantly. Hence, you know, I look at my human physiology, college human physiology class, my seniors, I have 50 kids, I have 42 girls and 8 boys. Okay, so the majority of the girls in this building take science, and that's a big change of what's going on. But back then, that was not. And there was she had a lot of struggles fighting the chauvinism of the time and doing what she needed to do. And she did not get along with Watson and Crick. They were competing. And so kind of this clandestine thing that was going on is that Watson and Crick actually, the story goes, and there's some validity to it, that they had actually planted a spy in Franklin's group to get her data. And to not let her know about, because they figured out some things, but they didn't know the exact picture of it. And there is some validity to that one of their colleagues was actually working as kind of like a double agent, and taking her data and passing. There was a pub in Oxford that they would meet at night, and he would pass information on to those two as they went through it. And some of it has been proven to be true. So they don't know how much of it was, but a lot of it was. But she had X-ray pictures. She was able to use X-rays to figure out that the lattice structure that we were looking at. And then Watson and Crick worked on the chemical part of it and were able to figure out, they already knew the A's and the T's and the C's and the G's matched up. That was back from Chargraph stuff. But that twist of the ladder was what the X-rays were telling them. What Watson and Crick basically did is they took everybody's data and was able to figure out what the structure was. They did some of their own stuff, but a lot of it, their brilliance was in just taking putting pieces together to make everything fit together. And they were young. I think Watson was 28 and Crick was like 30 when they figured this out. And came up with the double helix structure in 53, won the Nobel Prize, I believe, in 55 for that. Crick is still alive, I think. Watson is not. I think Crick is still alive. Crick's like 93 now. He started a huge think tank out in Massachusetts. I met Crick in 1995 at a conference. I got to talk to him for a couple minutes. He's a weird duck. He believes that the DNA actually came from aliens in space. I'm not kidding about it. So he went off the deep end a little bit on where he was going. But yeah, they were young. They were, how much older than you guys? 10 years older than you guys? 11, 12 years older than you guys? Think about that. Changing the whole society. And these are kind of, we always talk about who are the scientists in biology that were kind of the big dogs. I mean, that's made a huge impact on not just science, but on society. We throw Mendel in there because of his work with genetics. We throw Watson and Crick in there because of the structure of DNA. We throw Darwin in there because of the theory of evolution. That would be one that we look at. One that's coming up right now that we're going to be talking about later, something called, her name's Barbara McClintock from the University of Minnesota. She came up with this whole idea of something called jumping genes, and we're going to talk about how genes actually jump from cell to cell. It's pretty crazy. In the 70s, she figured that out, again, because she was a woman in the 70s. They all went, yeah, you don't know what you're doing, you're dumb. And then 1995, they went, oh, yeah, you're right. 23 years later, she won the Nobel Prize like 25 years after she'd actually figured it out. So we'll talk about her a little bit too, where she's going, but I do these periodically, because I want you to get some of the idea of, you know, a lot of times we find, like, you know, we talk about the citric acid cycle. Well, who the heck figured that out? And how did they figure it out? You know what I mean by that? You know, that was Johann Krebs, it used to be called the Krebs cycle. And, you know, how did people figure this kind of stuff out? So I wanted to give you a little bit of the science that, you know, these guys, you know, Watson and Crick was probably 10 years before they figured it out in their work. Some of these guys worked 20, 30, 40 years with data before they figured out. Darwin's theory of evolution was 40 years of collecting data before he published Origin of Species. All right? And in our society today, you guys want instant information now, and you don't want to wait for it, and you don't have the patience for it. All right? And in science, you have to, it has to be reproducible, and you have to be able to do it again and again and again to make sure it's right. And some people spend their lives collecting the right amount of data to finally come up with their hypothesis or their theory or whatever it is. And I tell you that again because as we get into, after we're done with the AP test, and we get into climate science and we start talking about climate change, we're going to talk about the main drivers, the main scientists that first started doing this that worked for NASA. And they've been working on this since 1965, 1970, 1975. They've dedicated their lives to studying this phenomenon. And it's important for me to tell you guys about that and understanding that because there's so much misinformation out there right now about that. And we believe, not you guys, I don't think in particular, but a lot of your parents and parents' friends and my parents will sit and listen to a politician talk about and believe the politician's idea of climate change, and they will not believe the climate scientists. And I don't understand that disconnect. And so I feel the need to educate you guys, not beyond just biology, but the idea of what's important and the dedication these guys